G'day legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day and so far you are having a fantastic week. Now just a quick side note before we get into the video, I just came home from having my MRI scan, of course on my brain tumour following 3 months of chemotherapy. Now tomorrow I will be receiving results on that, so fingers crossed the chemo has done something. If it has done nothing, that's good. The worst case is that the tumour has continued to grow, as these can just grow and exponential, and then we don't know what we are doing. So hopefully you cross your fingers for me as well. But as of today, we are officially in the 4th year of war, and it is very, very interesting to see between the pro-Ukrainian pages and the pro-Russian pages and see how then they are looking back across the war at victories, at failures, at high points and at low points. It's very interesting to see the two perspectives looking back over these years. Now, legends, as always, of course, we have a lot to go over. We're going to go over the explosives that went off at the Russian consulate, and we will talk about that because back on the 19th of February, we shared on here, and many pointed at me and went, well, that was just propaganda. We shared that Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service, the SVR, put out a warning for specifically this. We also talked in that about, could this be setting up for false flags? Could it be real attacks? With intelligence services, it's always difficult to know, but we'll talk about that. We need to talk about what has become at the United Nations with, of course, resolutions getting passed, but we need to see who abstained, who voted yes, who voted no, because that may be very telling. Of course, we will have a look at the maps, but a lot of this video is going to be talking about Europe and comments that Europeans, as well as the President of the United States, Mr. Trump, has made. But it does seem that Europe has made their decision, that they are looking to stand with Ukraine until the end, regardless of the US, regardless of if the US withdraws support or how the US sees this, or the negotiations the US may be having without them with Russia. Of course, this comes with a variety of challenges, from Europe's degraded industrial base to reliance on America's systems, and of course, not to be understated, is internal division in Europe as well. Now, can Europe realistically fill the hole the US would leave? Can they fill that void? Well, from my analysis, I would say no. From all the calculations that I take into place as far as economically, industrial, and as well as how much reserve, especially looking at the systems that are reliant on the US, I don't believe they can fill that void. But I guess if this is the path where this war is moving, well, we are going to see for better or for worse. But my big question in this would be, what then happens when Europe comes to the conclusion that Ukraine's needs isn't just press conferences, Twitter posts, and more weapons? What happens when Europe comes to the conclusion that Ukraine needs more men? What happens at that point in time? And if Putin's war, and this war evolves into Europe and America growing apart, dividing Europe into factions, and draws America closer to Russia, I believe that that is beyond even Putin's most wild fantasies for an end to the war. And as we've spoken about, the worst possible scenario. And for those suggesting that the new enemy is a mixture of China, Russia, and America, I beg you to look at any single metric used to conclude power and successful military or economic actions. And if you take these into account, it is in no one's interest that this becomes a unipolar, all-encompassing power or alliance. Those suggesting that a united Europe would stand up against a united China, Russia, America, and India and Australia and Canada, they would then move with America, in my belief. I'm sorry to say, but I believe that you are kidding yourselves. And we're going to speak more on that in a second. So let's start with my European folder. And as we see from pages here like the European Commission that they are tweeting today, of course, after the meetings that took place online and in Kyiv, that, of course, all of Ukraine's 91 borders remains Ukraine. And we see this said more and more, well, since the beginning, but reiterated, I should say now, by European leaders. And we see, of course, Ursula von der Leyen then today tweeting out this photo as well, family between the European Union and Ukraine. And the EU is preparing a package worth 20 billion euros for Ukraine. And this, of course, is due to American funds drying up. And they're also putting forward the 16th sanctions package against Russia. They're targeting banks, Russia's shadow fleet, and fleet of vessels that they deem unsafe, banning then export of aluminium or aluminum for those Americans out there, and putting restrictions on dual-use items, particularly chemicals. Remember, things that can be dual-use can just about be anything, but more restrictions on that, and also software for CNC machines. These are used for really high-end parts, whether for vehicles or weapons or bicycle parts. My brother owns a bicycle company, of course, uses CNC machines all day, so I know a little bit about that, and more restrictions on media that they deem to be pro-Kremlin or have that narrative as well. One thing I'll say about sanctions is it always seems very interesting to me that Europe claims that this war is existential for them, and yet doesn't introduce these sanctions until we enter the fourth year of the war. Why were these not there on day one? So where I believe in the future we will look back once things die off and go, a lot of the European support was rhetoric rather than actually seeing that as their own reality. 3 years in, these companies, they've either transitioned knowing this was coming, or they have then plans in place for if and when this came. Everyone knew that these were going to get hit. So as far as, you know, the big hits we saw initially for sanctions, every sanctions package from here will probably be less and less. But again, we will see. I would not be surprised to see more targeting against shadow fleet. But this is something about Europe that I wanted to share with someone from behind the scenes. A somewhat rhetorical question. How come in Zelensky's orbit, and remember, the entire Western world has been orbiting him since the 24th of Feb 2022, hasn't there been enough power to make a strong enough argument for the realist approach in wartime? It is a similar argument to the one by which, in 2022, I found it mind-boggling that in the rooms where Putin was deciding to invade Ukraine, there seemed to have been no serious voices proposing a sober risk-benefit analysis. So what he says is back in 2022, he can't believe that where Putin and his generals were making these plans, that no one there was on the other side, on the pessimistic side, going, well, what could happen is that the initial movements fail and then we step into a protracted attritional phase of war, which of course has happened, but he's believed, well, they thought that it was going to be a cakewalk and didn't plan on that occurring. But saying on the other side that with all the Western analysis floating around with all of this, that where is the realist approach in wartime? And if Trump brings up something like that, it's instantly seen as misinformation rather than, look, there needs to be, and this is why I bring up the manpower, needs to be huge conscription of men. That is the realist approach to a protracted attritional war. That it cannot just be Twitter posts and press conferences. At the end of the day, there needs to be hundreds of thousands of men trained, armed, and also willing to fight, which may actually be the more challenging part. The scary part here is that the Russian system has seemingly evolved, while the European and Ukrainian systems seemingly haven't, and are doubling down on the right principles, magically upholding themselves by their own weight and somehow compensating the realities on the ground. In other words, to add to the industrial centre of Ukraine is located outside of Ukraine and is activated by positive information field, I would add that there seems to be a view that we are losing on the ground, but since our principles are right, we are winning, which the Europeans then emanate to our key allies and foes alike. It is this dynamics that scare the shit out of me. And this is something that we are going to talk about and really, really break down, is this idea of being then right, therefore that you are going to win in the end. And as long as your principles, morals are in the correct position, that then therefore you are winning. And we'll break down, but what happens if the other side vehemently disagree with that, or even worse, couldn't care less about that? So we'll step back a little bit and I'll talk about how I observe Europe as a whole before we get into Trump, Putin, and maybe Trump's tactics in this. Is you'll often hear me refer to Europe as moving postmodernist, or more often people will refer to this as left. That knowledge is relative, not always objective. Simply, I feel a certain way, or my experience is X. I see this as right, just, or fair, so therefore that must be true, that knowledge is relative. I think in the most simple and common way that we see this daily is the idea of gender fluidity, that my experience or feeling is X, so therefore I am X, not the objective truth. But then that relative becomes knowledge, or, quote, the truth. Or the idea in Europe of diversity is our strength. That decisions or opinions are based on emotion, and do I or we feel that it's right, when even if you look objectively, the data may not actually agree with you. And these are just some examples of this. And again, the data in this system will be ignored as long as people see that the relative knowledge is right, or the principles are there. And I believe that we are seeing this sort of parasitic thinking seep into not only just society and media, but also then even into strategic decision-making centres. Now, this may be nitpicky, but I think it may be an example of how we can see this go all the way. Even the chief of the United Kingdom's Secret Intelligence Service, known as MI6, he has felt the need to publicly announce his pronouns online. And you can see where I am sort of drawing this together. If there is this movement that way. Now, I'm not saying the movement is good or bad, but I'm saying that can greatly affect actually having a realistic view of things you may not agree with at all. And of course, having this can influence decisions by not seeing, because you don't accept the reality of data. And what we have seen is fantastic analysis, great wartime analysts, be unwilling to apply their own logic or their own rules when it comes to this war, that they will say in X type of attritional war, these are the factors. But if those factors are lining up that it's saying, well, Russia is objectively winning the war at the moment, that they will then ignore that. Again, that knowledge is relative, and a lot of that has to do with your own emotion. And I fear that a lot of European leaders and their analysts haven't actually moved past the idea of Russia is wrong, Ukraine is right. And this may be correct, that Russia is wrong, Ukraine is right on the war. But again, you can't base everything 3 years on that. You can't base your analysis on and future decisions on that, because it will be incorrect. Even if it is correct emotionally, correct objectively true, you can't have your analysis on that, because it will end up with that parasitic thinking, and you'll end up at maybe a wrong area. The idea that I support Ukraine, therefore that I am right, and therefore they will inevitably win, while ignoring their own metrics for determining the war. And this is the thing, is in this calculation, you might have all the right numbers that you're putting in. But if you're not willing to actually see that A equals B times C squared, if you're not really willing to work that out, and if you don't like the answer that comes out, then your propaganda is not analysis. And I think there's a lot of thinkers who are doing this because they don't like the idea. You may be, and they probably are morally right. But again, morals and principles, they don't win wars. especially against an enemy who doesn't care how you feel, they don't care how you see them, and wholeheartedly rejects your entire world order. And this idea of because we are right with our principles and ethics and morals, which people will disagree with, but the idea of that, so therefore we will ultimately win, it doesn't add up when you are fighting an enemy who doesn't care how you feel, how you see them, and fully rejects your own ideology. And as an outsider looking in, I think Europe needs to be very, very careful. I think that they are in a very difficult position currently. Europe in many ways has become a museum for tourists to see relics of states where giants once stood. It's in a self-imposed backward slide due to emotions driving decisions before objectivity. Europe's future cannot be based purely on its rich past or the influence it may have had in a growing world of power to its east. So again, we will see, but I just wanted to touch on that because I do think there is this idea to not see things for how they are and that influencing decisions based on emotion and principle rather than maybe military or economic realities. Sorry for the long-winded part in the middle. So let's look over some things that Trump has said and try and get an idea of where Trump is thinking about this. Remember, if you want to actually analyse a situation, you can't just see it for what you agree with. You need to try and look at it from how someone else is. So in this, you need to look at it as how does Zelensky see this? How does Trump see this? And legally, basically, is how does Putin see this, and try and look at that to try and analyse what is being said. So Trump had a post on, I believe, well, this, I grabbed it from his Twitter, but I think this is from his, yes, from truth.com. Of course, he had a meeting with French President Emmanuel Macron. We'll go over some bits he said in this. I emphasise the importance of the vital critical minerals and rare earth deals between the United States and Ukraine, which we hope will be signed very soon. This deal, which is an economic partnership, will ensure that American people recoup the tens of billions of dollars and military equipment sent to Ukraine. So we know Trump is not letting up on this. He's probably pushing very high with that $500 billion figure to try and settle back down at 150 or 200 billion and look like he has moved the most. Whilst we're also helping Ukraine's economy grow as this brutal and savage war comes to an end. So he's saying it's coming to an end. But again, like I said yesterday, is we are either on the cusp of end or on the cusp of wider, more prolonged, more patritional, maybe that can be a word, attritional protracted war. At the same time, I'm in serious discussions with President Vladimir Putin of Russia concerning the ending of the war, and also major economic development transactions which will take place between the United States and Russia. Talks are proceeding very well. So he says talks are proceeding well with Putin concerning war and further economic development between the US and Russia. And of course, this is where many have gone, well, now America and Trump is an enemy of the state, and the war now is against Russia and America. And like I've said, the complete rejection of US politics, could this push a closer bond between a incredibly traditionalist country as far as where Russia is trying to paint themselves and a growing traditionalist conservative country of America? And that should be of great concern. Alexander Dugin's theory of a multipolar world, when he talks about just growing into different poles of the world away from a unipolar world, one of the things that he does state is he says, well, I don't know where the poles would go. Now, regardless of what you think of Dugin, can we see that there are poles growing? Yes, China is catching up, and we could not say that we are in a complete unipolar world at the moment. But we don't know where the lines will be drawn. Could it be that we have an Islamic civilization and a European civilization and this, that, or the rest? Or may it be that some of the civilizations and alliances that grow are not along state borders at all? It is between traditionalist conservative countries, however you may want to call it, and that is embracing a whole lot of things, and then more progressive postmodern style countries. Could that be where the lines are drawn and the divide between maybe where a democratic Europe and a democratic America really sit? It's very, very difficult. Now, of course, one of the things we have seen is that President Trump has referred to Zelensky as a dictator, and this is very interesting, this question asked here.
I call Zelensky a dictator. Would you use the same words regarding Putin?
I
I don't use those words lightly. I think that we're going to see how it all works out. Let's see what happens. I think we have a chance of a really good settlement between various countries. And, you're talking about Europe, and you're talking about Ukraine as part of that whole situation. The other side has a lot of support also.
So in the end, saying that Russia has a lot of support, I think it's interesting to see President Macron's face in this, but he says that he doesn't use those words lightly. That won't refer to Putin as a dictator, but will refer to Zelensky as a dictator, and reinforcing that I don't use that lightly.
Those words lightly. I think that we're going to see how it all works out.
And we'll see how it all works out. Now, what is Trump's tactic in this? What is his tactic between trying to say that a more authoritarian state of Russia isn't, whilst, a become authoritarian state under martial law, which is what martial law is to do, will refer to Zelensky as a dictator. And of course, this draws that division between the US and Europe much, much further away, because of course, to Europe, and what all the Europeans are saying, at least on the majority, are holding Zelensky as the guiding light towards democracy. But what may Trump be doing? And this was sent across from one of my mates as well. I see Trump's recent personal attacks on Zelensky as a way to remove him from any potential negotiations and encourage the Russians to the table by copying their words and stroking their egos. So as a way to discredit Zelensky and bring Russians to the table. It boosts Trump's own status as the only guy who can get the deal done. The US can look like a big brother stepping in and ending the fight between two children. A way to remind everyone that the US is the leader of the free world and that they are the ones to thank for all our Western prosperity. So basically saying in this that Trump may not actually believe this, but what he's trying to do is discredit Zelensky to the point where the only person negotiating on behalf of the West is Trump, and that he can say, we ended this, and no one else really has a say in it. So I guess I'll present that, and you let me know what you think of this. But there's been a little bit worse news too, and this isn't shared as much, regarding Zelensky's presidency. Ukrainian parliament rejects a resolution supporting Zelensky. A resolution reaffirming the legitimacy of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky failed to secure enough backing to pass in the Ukrainian parliament on Monday. The resolution received 280 votes, but it needs 226. 54 members of parliament are present in the meeting room, did not take part in the vote, and 38 representatives from Zelensky's Servant of the People party were included in that. Now, the resolution was designed by the parliamentary leadership as a symbolic show of support for Zelensky, whose legitimacy has come under fire from Russia and more recently the United States. But of course, this has somewhat backfired by, well, it hasn't done this. Without parliamentary support, international agreements such as a prospective peace treaty with Russia or a proposed raw materials agreement with the US cannot be ratified and come into force. So this is a very difficult part in this. Now, this is largely symbolic, but it does mean that Zelensky no longer has the support from the US or the majority support in his own parliament. So this is largely symbolic at this point, but due to these at the bottom, could become very, very important, could become right to the forefront. Now, this will especially become relevant if someone was to challenge the constitutional law on the legal regime of martial law. Of course, this is why Zelensky doesn't have to hold elections, is the 2015 constitution about the legal regime of martial law and not having to hold. But if someone were to challenge that, this could become relevant very, very quickly, as he doesn't have the support in the parliament or RADA. So that's something really, really worth thinking about. Now, of course, we need to talk about this as well, of what Macron has pulled Trump up on here. And of course, when we talk about frozen assets, we're talking about $300 billion.
There was a one to aggress.
Again, just so you understand, Europe is loaning the money to Ukraine. They get their money back.
No, in fact, to be frank, we paid 60% of the total effort, and it was through, like the US, loans, guarantee, grants, and we provided real money, to be clear. We have 230 billion frozen assets in Europe.
So, of course, Europe has given a lot of money, but there's also some on a loan that is coming off the 300 billion that is then frozen, that the money made on that money that can be sent. This is what a lot is referred to. So say the stock market returns at 10%, just for instance, let's say that, and you've got $300 billion. That's going to making $30 billion a year, and it is that is getting sent across. It's the profits on that frozen money.
Russian assets, but this is not as a collateral of a loan, because this is not our belonging. So they are frozen. If at the end of the day in the negotiation we will have with Russia, they're ready to give it to us.
So if the negotiation with Russia takes place and they're ready to give that money to them, then that is paying back the loan for Ukraine. But the question is, will Russia relinquish that $300 billion?
Super. It will be loaned at the end of the day, and Russia will have paid for that.
If you believe that, it's okay with me.
So Trump says, if you believe that, it's okay with me. So what Macron is saying is, well, the way we're getting our money back is it's Russia going to pay for this, because it's Russian $300 billion. We're giving the profits off this. If a negotiation, Russia relinquishes that money, then we will get paid back by that money. There's a lot of problems economically with that frozen assets due to, well, the risk it does put on the security, especially of the euro. Because, and the most simple terms I'll say at the moment, is if I am a Chinese billionaire and I run chemical plants, and a lot of my business is done in Europe, and I've got a lot of money in these banks in Europe somewhere for my company back in China, and I live on a yacht in Monaco. I have nothing to do with the Chinese government, and in the Chinese government, they make a move on Taiwan, and instantly all my money in my yacht and this and that is frozen or stolen. You can use that word interjectively if you'd like. That is one of the problems where people say it may undermine the banks, because you may get a lot of these companies or people who are owned by foreign entities go, well, we've seen what has happened with the money held here, so we might start moving our money into another currency somewhere. And a lot of these is going to be, of course, argument for the other side of the aisle, the argument for having a BRICS-only dollar. BRICS-only currency, I should say. So it's all interesting stuff, and there's been a lot of people raise large concern about not just freezing that and using the money that has generated, but if you were to take that money itself. And obviously Europe has not been prepared to do this yet, so they must share some of that same concern. Now, let's talk about the Russian consulate. Before then, we speak about the maps. I'm sorry this is taking so long. So back, I believe, the 19th, where's the date? Yes, on the 19th, we shared this. This came from the SVR website, that there would be something to disrupt negotiations as a series of terrorist attacks against Russian diplomatic missions in European countries. And they're talking about something may happen here. And like what we have said is, at this point in time, a Russian false flag doesn't make sense, that Russia is looking to get basically everything they want as long as they work with the US. So the risk versus reward doesn't add up here. But we have seen Slovakia too say that there will be European states do whatever they can to undermine these. Now, what is this? Well, I don't think it looks like a professional job or an inside job, because an inside job would have caused significantly more damage and made far more than news due to that. And a professional job would have done more damage as well. So what do I think this is? Well, I don't know, but we know it is somewhat improvised. So I guess we'll see. But incendiary devices explode outside the Russian consulate in Marseille. And the Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman, Maria Zakharova, has said the incident had all the hallmarks of a terrorist attack. 3 IEDs, improvised explosive devices, have been found thrown at the Russian consulate. Only 2 of them then detonated, and the 3rd was removed by a robot. Now, those who are reporting that these were Molotov cocktails, they're doing this to try and downplay this. This part here, detonation because of that has been removed by a robot. This, to me, is all that needs to be said to say this wasn't a Molotov cocktail, because at best, some bloke would have walked out there and fucking tipped it out, and because it's not on fire anymore, and at worst, they would have put on the bomb suit. You wouldn't get a bloody robot out there. Suspect fled, and an investigation has been launched. Now, how much will the investigation then come to light? Look, really, really unsure. No one was injured or killed in this, but there's a lot of adding up there. So again, with everything intelligence, it's hard to know whether it's legitimate intelligence or setting the stage. Like we've said, setting the stage doesn't really make sense unless it is to try and divide the US and Europe even more. So let's have a look at the maps before we talk about the UN. So of course we have Ukraine in the center of the screen, the capital of Kyiv, the red areas occupied since 22, the purple since 2014. Now these maps have not updated today, but we are in luck because of course we have Syriac maps with some updates. So actually, this is the first piece I want to show you. This isn't relevant to the maps, but I couldn't make a folder just for this. What we have seen recently is a lot of Russian drones taking down Ukrainian bridges. And it seems like what the Russian forces have discovered is they've discovered that all the bridges near the front line, this one is in the north of the country, I believe, that all the bridges are rigged to blow in case Ukraine does need to withdraw. And they've found this out. And then what they can do is they can fly in this being a fiber optically controlled drone. And then we can see where the explosives are laid. We saw this on a bridge very recently as well. And then this causes the explosion from a very small drone explosion to then destroy that bridge. So it's been like a recent discovery there, I guess. So let's talk about Chasiv Yar. Of course, we have then the Bakhmut front line. If this map will load, let's see if we can make this load. Here we go. There we go. Australian internet for you. So we have Bakhmut, Chasiv Yar, Stopochki. Of course, you are very, very familiar with this area. And I've got some geolocations to show you in here too. So we have then the Syriac maps. Now, what we're looking for is what lines up on these maps. So we have Stopochki here, and of course, where we see these spoils of the mines, and this coming up into control here. And how has he determined this? Well, I don't know, but the way I'd say it probably is off where we've seen Russian forces operating in small motorized units. So we have, of course, this. So right in about here, what we have is this geolocated footage here of Russian forces on a quad bike and dirt bikes here, of course, in a completely destroyed area, but moving down this road under fire, but launching an attack there. So we know 100% there's definitely grey zone out on that front. So let's then go into the north and compare some things. So of course we have Vovchansk, which has just been brought to absolute rubble. The amount of time that this has been sitting here versus the TOS, the thermobarracks, the FABs, the French hammers, the everything in here, completely demolished in here. That's why you can't get any geolocations, but just in the center, right around then these blocks in here, said to be a small Russian advancement of a couple of blocks in here. Then we'll head across to the northeast, of course, is Dovrichnia, as well as Topoli area, and we see, according to Syriac maps, 2 days ago, Russia took full control of the locality of Topoli. So they're claiming Russia has taken over Topoli and also to their border. And also this would include, if true, some high ground in here as well. But wait for any further confirmations or geolocations on this. Now, we'll move further down. Of course, we see the Kudakov front, Uluki and Rivkia, Constantinople. And we have this update here from Syriac that he is showing further movement down in this direction here. See where this paddock heads straight up to the north, running north-south, that straight up into this area. That there has been Russian advancement to that tree line. And then we'll come down. We mentioned yesterday that, where am I? Velyka Novosilka, sorry, I'm used to the map looking different, that this map showed more control than the Syriac map, and we can confirm this fill in today between this Novochertuvati. People get a bit of a kick out of me trying to and failing to pronounce things, but where this filled in yesterday. So let's look at, well, sorry, it'll actually show up today. But of course, yesterday's map showed this fill in here, but also more movement in the direction as well of Buratsky as well, which is out in here. So we are definitely seeing some movement on the maps. Now, to somewhat link back into what I was talking about at the beginning, we've seen this. The UN, the United Nations General Assembly, adopts a resolution advancing a comprehensive and a just and lasting peace for Ukraine. This is a resolution drafted by Ukraine and the European Union to condemn Russia, calls for de-escalation, early cessation of hostilities, and a peaceful resolution of the war against Ukraine. Now, you can see that this has, of course, gone through with 93 in favour, 18 against, and 16 have abstained from voting. Now, what is interesting to see where these lines of division are growing, because who has voted against? Russia, Belarus, that's not surprising. Hungary, not very surprising. US, Israel have also voted against. So that is very, very interesting to see that as well. Now, China has abstained from voting, and so has India. So what I'll say is the the nuclear superpowers have all either abstained or voted against, and the three primary superpowers of US, China, and India, they have either voted against or have abstained. So again, this is one of the things. I don't care if the UN says that the vote from Nepal is equal to that of China or US or Russia or India. I'm sorry, but it's not. I live in Australia. I understand we are the same. We're not a nuclear power, nor are we an economic powerhouse superpower. Sorry, Nepal, you copped a bit of shrapnel there. But again, that needs to be taken into account. Again, this is largely symbolic as well. We've seen that UN, their real power, it's become very apparent in Ukraine, even more apparent in Israel. Their real power, birds chirping, crickets bloody going. In a win for Ukraine, on the third anniversary of Russia's invasion, the General Assembly of the UN on Monday adopted 2 resolutions calling for an end to the war while rejecting a US draft that never mentioned Moscow's aggression. Instead, both resolutions made clear Russia was the aggressor. Reflecting the surety turnaround under President Trump, joined Russia in voting against a Europe-backed Ukrainian resolution. The US then abstained from voting in its own resolution after the Europeans seceded to amending it. So the US put one forward, the Europeans amended this, actually so did Russia, and then the US abstained from voting on their own one. That it was a setback for the Trump administration. They say whose resolutions are not legally binding, but it's seen as a barometer of world opinion. Not that it matters, because of course we saw the barometer of world opinion when Israel, and it was questions brought into the UN, that it was massively in favour, and what happened? Nothing. The vote was 93-18 with 65 abstentions. The result showed some diminished support for Ukraine because a previous assembly vote saw more than 140 nations condemn Russia's aggression. So that is a significant diminishing there. The assembly then considered the US drafted resolution, which acknowledges the tragic loss of life throughout Russia and the Ukrainian conflict, and implores a swift end to the conflict and further urges a lasting peace between Ukraine and Russia, but never mentions Moscow's aggression. France proposed 3 amendments, backed by more European countries. Add that the conflict was a result of full-scale invasion of Ukraine by the Russian Federation. The amendments reaffirmed the Assembly's commitment to Ukraine's sovereignty, independence, unity, and territorial integrity. Of course, the US then abstained from this, and Russia, they also proposed an amendment calling for root causes of the conflict to be addressed. So we can see where these dividing lines are growing and where maybe just politics, ideologies, regimes are shifting in the world as well. And like we have said multiple times, is the 20th century was a fight between ideologies. The 21st century will be a fight for unipolarity or a movement to multipolarity. So again, we will see. We'll see where America moves its chips around. Don't underestimate how powerful America is and how reliant Western militaries are on American technology and American logistics as well. Anyway, legends, you have a fantastic day, and I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.